Boy with injured arm begged the Hells Angels, "Be my friends." 72 Hells Angels showed up at school. 9-year-old Lucas had his arm in a cast covered with exactly 0 signatures. Not one friend, not one classmate, not even a teacher had signed it. For 3 weeks, he'd asked everyone at school, "Will you be my friend? Will you sign my cast?" They all said no. The popular kids laughed. The quiet kids avoided him. Even the other weird kids didn't want to be associated with him. So when Lucas saw a group of Hells Angels at a gas station, massive, tattooed, terrifying men that his mom told him to stay away from, desperation made him do something crazy. He walked up to the scariest-looking biker, held out his marker with his good hand, and whispered, "Will you be my friend? Will you sign my cast?" What that biker didn't involve signing the cast. What he did was pull out his phone, make one call, and set in motion the most legendary school arrival in history. 72 hours later, 72 Hells Angels rolled up to Riverside Elementary School, and what they did for this lonely boy didn't just give him friends. It taught an entire school a lesson about kindness they'd never forget. 9-year-old Lucas Bennett sat alone at the cafeteria table, carefully positioning his lunch tray so his casted arm rested comfortably on the edge. The cast was bright blue. He'd picked the color himself 3 weeks ago when he broke his arm falling off the monkey bars. The doctor had told him casts were great conversation starters at school, that all his friends would want to sign it. The doctor was wrong. Lucas didn't have friends to sign it. He looked down at the pristine blue surface, unmarked except for his own name that he'd written in the corner in black marker. Lucas B. Even his mom hadn't signed it. She'd said she would but kept forgetting, too busy with his 2 younger sisters and her 2 jobs. Lucas was used to being forgotten. At 9 years old, he'd already figured out he was the kind of kid who disappeared in crowds, who teachers called on last, who got picked last for teams in gym class. He wasn't bad at anything in particular, but he wasn't good at anything either. He was just average, forgettable, the kind of kid who could be absent for a week and nobody would notice. It wasn't that kids were mean to him, at least not actively cruel like they were to some kids. They just didn't see him. He existed in the peripheral vision of everyone's attention, never quite coming into focus. When he'd broken his arm, Lucas had thought maybe, just maybe, this would be his chance. Kids would feel sorry for him. They'd want to sign his cast. They'd gather around and ask how it happened, and he'd tell the story, which wasn't even that interesting, but he could embellish it. And suddenly he'd have people talking to him. For 3 weeks, Lucas had carried a black permanent marker in his pocket every single day. He'd approach kids in his class during free time. "Do you want to sign my cast?" They'd make excuses. "I don't have a marker. Maybe later. I'm not good at writing." He'd approach kids at recess. "Want to be the first to sign?" They'd look uncomfortable and drift away. He'd even asked his teacher, Mrs. Patterson, if she'd sign it. She'd said, "Oh, honey, I'm sure your friends will fill it up. Save the space for them." But there were no friends to save space for. Today was Friday, his 3-week anniversary of having a cast that looked exactly as it had the day he got it. Perfectly blank, screaming his loneliness to everyone who saw it. The school nurse had noticed yesterday, had given him a sad look that made Lucas want to disappear into the floor. "How's your arm healing, Lucas?" she'd asked gently. "Fine. Has anyone signed your cast yet?" "Not yet, but they will. Lots of people want to." The lie had tasted bitter. The nurse had looked at him with pity that made everything worse. "Well, I'll sign it if you'd like." Pride made Lucas shake his head. "No thanks. I'm saving room for my friends." Now, sitting alone at lunch, Lucas wondered why he'd lied. Why did he keep pretending he had friends when clearly, obviously, everyone could see he didn't? The unsigned cast was proof. Physical evidence of his complete social failure. He poked at his chicken nuggets without appetite, watching clusters of kids at other tables laughing together, sharing food, planning weekend sleepovers he'd never be invited to. The popular boys were drawing elaborate battle scenes on each other's notebooks. The popular girls were braiding each other's hair and giggling about something on someone's phone. Lucas was alone with his pristine blue cast and his black marker that had never been used. After school, Lucas's mom picked him up in their beat-up Honda. His sisters already buckled in the back seat arguing over a toy. "How was school, buddy?" she asked, pulling into traffic without really looking at him. "Fine. Anyone sign your cast yet?" The question stabbed. "Not yet." "Well, I'm sure they will soon. Hey, we need to stop for gas. Girls, stop fighting back there." His mom pulled into a gas station, got out to pump gas, and told Lucas to watch his sisters. Through the window, Lucas could see a group of men gathered near the air pump. 6 or 7 of them, all wearing leather vests covered in patches, all with beards and tattoos and motorcycles parked in a row. Hell's Angels. Lucas knew the patch, had seen it on TV shows his mom didn't let him watch, but that he'd glimpsed at friends, no, not friends, at other kids' houses. His mom had always told him to stay away from bikers. "They're dangerous," she'd said more than once. "If you see men like that, you walk the other way." But Lucas watched them through the window and thought they looked happy. They were laughing about something, clapping each other on the back, passing around a phone and pointing at something on the screen. They looked like friends, like people who belonged together. Lucas made a decision that was either the bravest or stupidest thing he'd ever done. He still wasn't sure which. He unbuckled his seatbelt, told his sisters to stay put. They ignored him, too absorbed in their argument, and got out of the car. His mom was on the other side of the pump, scrolling through her phone while gas pumped, not paying attention. Lucas walked toward the bikers on legs that trembled, clutching his black marker in his good hand like a talisman. As he got closer, they looked even more intimidating. These were huge men, covered in tattoos, wearing patches that probably meant things Lucas didn't understand. The biggest one noticed him first. He was maybe 6'5", probably 300 pounds, with a gray beard down to his chest and arms the size of tree trunks. He looked down at Lucas with an expression that could have been annoyance or curiosity or anything in between. "You lost, kid." Lucas almost ran, almost turned around and fled back to the safety of the car and his world of invisible loneliness. But something, desperation, maybe, or the soul-crushing weight of that blank cast, made him hold his ground. He held up his casted arm, the pristine blue a stark reminder of his friendlessness, and his voice came out smaller than he'd intended. "Will you be my friend? Will you sign my cast?" The biker stared at him for a long moment. The other men had stopped talking and were watching this interaction with expressions Lucas couldn't read. The silence stretched out so long Lucas was sure they were going to laugh at him or tell him to get lost or, "Why's it blank?" the big biker asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You just get it?" 3 weeks ago, Lucas admitted, his voice cracking. "Nobody at school will sign it. I asked everyone. They all said no. Or they made excuses. Or they just forgot I asked." The biker crouched down, a considerable feat given his size, so he was closer to Lucas's eye level. His face, which had looked so intimidating from a distance, was creased with concern up close. "What's your name, kid?" "Lucas. I'm Bear. These are my brothers Gunner, Hawk, Reaper, Steel, Torch, and Mace. We're part of the Hell's Angels Motorcycle Club." He paused. "Your mom know you're over here talking to us?" Lucas glanced back at the car. His mom still wasn't paying attention. "She's pumping gas. She tell you to stay away from bikers?" Lucas nodded miserably. "She says you're dangerous." Bear's laugh was deep and genuine. "Smart woman. We can be dangerous to people who deserve it. But we're not dangerous to kids, Lucas. Especially not to kids who are brave enough to walk up to 7 scary-looking bikers and ask for friendship." He held out his hand for the marker. "I'll sign your cast. But first, I want you to tell me why nobody at school signed it." "Truth now." So Lucas told him. About being invisible. About not having friends. About 3 weeks of asking and being rejected. About the lie he told the nurse. About eating lunch alone every day. About being the kid nobody remembered. By the time he finished, all 7 bikers were crouched or sitting around him, listening with attention Lucas had never experienced before. These terrifying men with their patches and tattoos and massive bikes were giving him their complete focus. "That's rough, little man," Gunner said, shaking his head. "Kids can be cruel without even trying." "It's not even that they're mean," Lucas said quietly. "They just Don't see me. I'm not interesting enough to notice. Bear took the marker and uncapped it. Well, I see you, Lucas. And you're plenty interesting. Takes guts to do what you just did. Most kids wouldn't have the courage. He signed his name on the cast in big, bold letters. Bear Hells Angels MC. Then he passed the marker to Gunner, who signed. Then Hawk. Then Reaper. All 7 bikers signed Lucas's cast, their names and club affiliation written in large script that covered a good portion of the blue surface. Lucas stared at his cast, at the signatures that transformed it from a symbol of rejection into proof that someone, multiple someones, had cared enough to sign. His eyes filled with tears. He tried to blink back. "Thank you," he whispered. Bear wasn't done. He pulled out his phone. "Lucas, what school do you go to?" "Riverside Elementary." "Why?" "Because I'm going to make some calls. My club, we do community outreach, especially for kids who are having a hard time. How would you feel about some of my brothers coming to your school? Meeting you for lunch, maybe showing the other kids that you've got people who care about you." Lucas's eyes went wide. "Really? You'd do that? Kid, you walked up to 7 Hells Angels and asked us to be your friend. That's either the bravest or the craziest thing I've seen in years. And either way, it deserves respect. We take care of people who show us courage, Lucas. That includes making sure a 9-year-old doesn't eat lunch alone." Lucas heard his mom calling his name. She'd finally noticed he wasn't in the car. "I have to go. But thank you. Really thank you. We'll see you Monday, Lucas," Bear said with a wink. "And bring that marker. You're going to need it." Lucas ran back to the car, his mom scolding him for wandering off but stopping mid-sentence when she saw his cast covered in biker signatures. "Lucas, who wrote on your—" "They're my friends," Lucas said, and for the first time in weeks he smiled. Monday morning, Lucas walked into Riverside Elementary with his cast prominently displayed and his black marker in his pocket, though he wasn't sure he'd need it. Bear had said to bring it, but Lucas didn't really believe the bikers would show up. Adults made promises to kids all the time and then forgot. Why would these men be different? First period came and went. So did second. By lunchtime, Lucas had resigned himself to another day of eating alone. The biker signatures on his cast just a nice memory from a kind moment that would lead nowhere. He was walking toward the cafeteria when he heard it. The sound was unmistakable. Dozens of motorcycle engines, all rumbling in unison, getting louder and closer. Other kids heard it too, crowding toward windows, teachers looking confused and concerned. Lucas's heart started pounding. They couldn't, could they? He ran to the nearest window and looked out at the parking lot, and what he saw made him gasp. Motorcycles, dozens of them, maybe 50, maybe more, all rolling into the Riverside Elementary parking lot in tight formation. And riding them were bikers in leather vests, all bearing the same patches Lucas had seen on Bear and his friends. The entire school ground to a halt. Teachers were running toward the principal's office. Kids were pressed against every window. Someone pulled the fire alarm by accident in the chaos, adding to the confusion. Principal Morrison came rushing out of the building looking panicked, probably expecting a crisis or a threat or anything except what was actually happening. The bikers parked their motorcycles in perfect rows, 72 of them total, and dismounted in synchronized precision. Bear was at the front, and when he saw Lucas's face pressed against the cafeteria window, he smiled and waved. Principal Morrison approached Bear cautiously. "Excuse me, gentlemen, but this is a school. You can't just—" "We're here to see Lucas Bennett," Bear interrupted politely but firmly. "He's a friend of ours, and we heard he's been eating lunch alone. We're here to change that." "I don't understand. You can't just bring 72 motorcycles to an elementary school." "We're not here to cause trouble, sir. We're here to support a kid who needs support. We called ahead. Your secretary should have gotten our message this morning about a community outreach visit." Principal Morrison looked confused, then annoyed, then resigned. "Fine, but you can't all come inside. Fire code." "Don't need to come inside," Bear said. "We'll set up out here. Lucas can have lunch outside today, with his friends." Lucas was ushered outside by Mrs. Patterson, who looked bewildered but not unkind. "Lucas, these men say they're your friends? They signed my cast," Lucas said, holding it up like proof. The scene in the parking lot was surreal. The bikers had pulled folding chairs and tables from somewhere, maybe from the trailers a few had been pulling, and were setting up what looked like an outdoor cafeteria. They had pizza boxes, drinks, chips, and even a cake that said Lucas's Lunch Crew. Bear saw him and opened his arms. "Lucas, come meet the rest of the brothers." What followed was the most extraordinary lunch of Lucas Bennett's life. Possibly the most extraordinary lunch any Riverside Elementary student had ever witnessed. Lucas sat at a table surrounded by 72 Hell's Angels, all of them treating him like he was the most important person in the world. They asked him about school, about his favorite subjects, about his hobbies. They told him stories about their motorcycles, their families, their own experiences being overlooked or dismissed as kids. They made him laugh with jokes and impressions. They made him feel seen in a way he'd never experienced. And most importantly, they made him visible to everyone watching from the school windows. Every student at Riverside Elementary was pressed against glass, watching this scene unfold. Watching Lucas, invisible, forgettable Lucas, sitting with dozens of bikers who were clearly there specifically for him. Teachers were watching. The principal was watching. Even the lunch ladies came outside to see what was happening. Bear had brought the black marker. "Okay, brothers, Lucas here needs his cast signed properly. We got 7 signatures on there, but we've got 65 more men here who want to be counted as his friends. Let's fill this thing up." For the next 20 minutes, Lucas's cast became a masterpiece of signatures, drawings, and messages. Every single biker signed it. Some drew motorcycles or flames or skulls. Some wrote encouraging messages. "Stay strong, Lucas. You're braver than you know. Never stop being you." By the time they finished, Lucas's cast was completely covered. A vibrant, chaotic, beautiful record of 72 people who had shown up for him. But Bear still wasn't done. He stood up and addressed the crowd of students watching from windows. His voice carried across the parking lot and through the open cafeteria doors. "My name is Bear, and I'm with the Hell's Angels. We came here today because our friend Lucas," he put his hand on Lucas's shoulder, "needed support. He needed people to show up for him. He needed to know he matters." Bear held up Lucas's cast so everyone could see the signatures. This cast was blank for 3 weeks. Lucas asked his classmates to sign it and nobody would. He ate lunch alone every day. He was invisible to you all. But he's not invisible to us. Lucas showed courage by approaching us at a gas station and asking for friendship. That courage deserves respect. That courage deserves support. So we're here to make sure everyone knows Lucas Bennett is not alone. He's got 72 brothers watching his back now. He turned to address Principal Morrison. "Sir, with your permission, we'd like to do a presentation for your students about bullying, about loneliness, about the importance of kindness. We'd like to talk about what happens when kids feel invisible, and how easy it is to include people who are being left out. Would that be all right?" Principal Morrison, who had been standing to the side looking increasingly less antagonistic and more moved by what he was witnessing, nodded. "Yes, I think that would be very appropriate." What followed was an impromptu assembly that none of the students would ever forget. The bikers spoke. Not all of them, but several, including Bear, about their own experiences with loneliness, rejection, and feeling invisible. They talked about how many of them had been the weird kids or the poor kids or the different kids in school. They talked about how small acts of kindness, a signature on a cast, an invitation to sit together at lunch, a simple hello in the hallway, could change someone's entire day, entire week, entire life. They talked about how being tough didn't mean being cruel, and how the bravest thing you could do was be kind to someone everyone else ignored. And they talked about Lucas, about the courage it took for him to approach strangers for friendship, about how that courage had inspired them to ride 72 strong to make sure he knew he mattered. By the end, there wasn't a dry eye among the teachers. Many of the students looked thoughtful, uncomfortable, or ashamed, perhaps recognizing themselves in the story of classmates who ignored Lucas. Before the bikers left, they gave Lucas a leather jacket, kid-sized, with a patch on the back that read, honorary Hell's Angel, and Lucas, friend of the club. You wear this when you want, Bear said. You're pack now, Lucas. That means you've got family. You've got people who will show up for you. Always. Lucas hugged him. This massive, intimidating biker who had shown him more kindness than any adult in his life besides his overworked mom. Thank you for being my friend. Thank you for asking, Bear replied, his voice thick. Takes a special kid to do what you did. We're honored to know you. As the 72 motorcycles rolled out of the parking lot in formation, their engines creating a thunderous goodbye, Lucas stood watching with his fully signed cast, his new jacket, and something he'd never had before, hope. The change was immediate and profound. Kids who had never spoken to Lucas suddenly wanted to be his friend, or at least wanted to see his famous cast and hear the story. He went from invisible to famous overnight. Some of the attention was genuine. Kids who had themselves felt lonely or overlooked approached Lucas and apologized for not signing his cast before, for not including him. Some of these kids became actual friends, building relationships based on understanding what it felt like to be forgotten. Some of the attention was less genuine. Kids who wanted proximity to the cool story, who wanted to be able to say they were friends with the kid the Hells Angels came to school for. Lucas learned quickly to tell the difference. But the biggest change was in how Lucas saw himself. He walked taller now, spoke up in class, joined the art club and discovered he was actually pretty good at drawing. Made the soccer team, not because he was suddenly athletic, but because he had the confidence to try out. The bikers kept their promise. Bear and several others checked in regularly, stopping by the school for lunch once a month, inviting Lucas to kid-appropriate club events like charity rides and community cookouts. They showed Lucas that being tough didn't mean being mean, that real strength included gentleness, that the scariest-looking people could have the biggest hearts. Lucas's mom, initially terrified when she learned what had happened, came around after meeting Bear and understanding that these men had given her son something she couldn't: a support system, male role models, and a sense of belonging. 3 months after the bikers came to school, Lucas's cast came off. The doctor was amazed. Not by the healing, which was normal, but by the cast itself. I've been doing this for 20 years, the doctor said, examining the completely covered cast with its 72 signatures, drawings, and messages. I've never seen a cast so thoroughly signed. Most kids get maybe 10, 15 signatures tops. This is remarkable. You must be very popular. Not popular, Lucas corrected with a shy smile. Just lucky. I found the right friends. The doctor let Lucas keep the cast instead of cutting it into pieces as was typical. This is too special to destroy. This is art. Lucas took it home and his mom helped him mount it in a shadow box frame that hung in his room. Permanent reminder of the day everything changed. The day he gathered courage to approach strangers and ask for something everyone needs. Friendship. The day 72 bikers showed up to prove that kindness matters, that showing up matters, that no child should ever feel invisible. 5 years later, when Lucas was 14 and in high school, he gave a TED Talk that went viral. He told the story of the unsigned cast, the brave decision to approach scary strangers, and the 72 Hells Angels who taught him that family is about who shows up, not who you're related to. I was 9 years old and completely alone, Lucas said in his talk, his voice clear and confident in a way it never would have been before. I had no friends. I was invisible to my entire school. I had a broken arm and a blank cast that symbolized my loneliness. Then I made the craziest decision of my life. I asked 7 terrifying bikers to be my friend. He held up the shadow-boxed cast for the audience to see. They didn't just sign my cast. They showed up. 72 of them came to my school. They made sure everyone knew I mattered. They changed my life by simply refusing to let me be invisible. And they taught me the most important lesson I've ever learned. Kindness is courage, showing up is everything, and sometimes the people society tells you to fear are exactly the heroes you need. The talk had millions of views. It inspired schools across the country to implement buddy systems and inclusion programs. It sparked conversations about childhood loneliness and the importance of noticing isolated kids. But most importantly to Lucas, it led to hundreds of messages from other lonely kids thanking him for making them feel less alone. Bear and his brothers watched the TED Talk at the clubhouse. 72 tough bikers crying openly at the speech given by the shy 9-year-old who had become a confident 14-year-old advocate for inclusion. "We did that," Gunnar said, wiping his eyes. "We helped make that kid who he is." "Nah," Bear said, shaking his head. "Lucas did that. He was always that brave, always that special. We just showed him he didn't have to be invisible. We just gave him what every kid deserves, to be seen." 10 years after the gas station encounter, when Lucas was 19 and in college studying social work with plans to help isolated kids find connection, Bear called him. "Hey, little brother. Got a situation you might be interested in. There's a kid at Jackson Elementary, 7 years old, just got glasses and the kids are calling him for eyes. He's eating lunch alone, getting bullied on the playground. His teacher reached out to us, asked if we could do for him what we did for you. Thought you might want to ride with us when we show up." Lucas didn't hesitate. "I'll be there. What's the kid's name?" "Marcus. And Lucas? He's got an unsigned cast too. Broke his wrist 3 weeks ago. Sound familiar?" Lucas smiled, remembering the blank blue cast that had started everything. Yeah, it does. Tell Marcus we're coming. And tell him to bring a marker. He's going to need it." The cycle continued. Lucas, now a young man, riding with 72 Hells Angels to an elementary school to show another lonely kid that he mattered, that he was seen, that courage would be rewarded with friendship. Because that's what you did when someone showed you kindness, you passed it forward. You showed up for others the way someone showed up for you. You refused to let anyone feel as invisible as you once felt. And you made damn sure every kid with a broken arm and an unsigned cast knew that somewhere there were people who would see them, sign that cast, and show up with 72 motorcycles to prove that they mattered. That was Bear's gift to Lucas. And it was Lucas's gift to Marcus. And it would be Marcus's gift to the next lonely kid who needed to know they weren't alone. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is answer that call with an overwhelming show of support that changes everything. That's what friends do. That's what family does. That's what courage looks like, on both sides of the request. Subscribe to Hell's Angels Stories for more incredible tales of courage, kindness, and unexpected friendship. Motorcycle, Red Heart. Share this if you believe every lonely kid deserves to know they matter. That showing up is everything. And that sometimes the scariest looking strangers are exactly the friends you need.